Blue Ash Crisis, a work in progress, by author, Jayce, Ran, Chapter 1, First Draft. Black pavement shines brightly in the luminescence of red and blue strobing lights. Woo cries the sirens while a crowd of people is kept at bay with wooden roadblocks. Several officers surround the scene walking from their cars talking with each other covered by the sound of the loud howling sirens. A storefront shines in the neon city lights shadowed by its inner darkness. A police officer holds out his gun carefully walking through an open flat glass door. Outside the shop owner cries out, "Please, officer, please do not damage anything." The police sergeant standing beside the shop owner says, "This is not of our concern. The only concern we have is getting that thing out," causing the shopkeeper's face turning a shade paler. As the officer slips inside the building, he discovers the lights still flicker inside an almost supernatural inky darkness that reminds him of some sort of deep depth. A sudden chill comes over him as the lights dim out completely. His breath floats through the air, leaving behind a ghostly spirit of vapor. He squints his eyes trying to see clearly in the darkness, and it leaves him to only conclude the entire shop has been trashed. "Is anyone in here?" he calls out. A rustle from his left side causes him to turn swiftly. "Come out with your hands up," he shouts into the haunting void. His eyes grow wide as a sharp pain bursts from his stomach. He did not have a chance to realize the splash of his own blood slapping against the polished tile floor as his body is flung in an instant across the room into a wall, leaving his own scream trailing behind him. From outside the sergeant hollers, "Get your asses in there." Following the orders of their superior, other officers rush into the building with their guns already drawn, safeties off. In the shadows, the silhouette of a woman stands, her hair spread as though static has drawn it out. On the ground, another officer yells as she raises her hand, revealing sparks of electricity. The room is lit in strobes of muzzle flash as the officers open fire. The woman is revealed to have a twisted and distorted smile, her fingers splayed open, stopping the bullets in midair. They hover for a moment as if impacting against something unseen, then unceremoniously drop to the floor. Her eyes flash a blinding light, shattering all the glass in the room, causing a supernatural wind to turn the shards into a storm of shrapnel tearing through the officers' bodies. Her golden blonde locks fly about in the maelstrom of wind. From outside the building, flashes sending the other officers running for cover behind their cars. Then darkness returns to the quiet, still storefront. The other officers begin looking at each other as awkward silence returns. Another singular flash lights up the streets as the bodies of the officers ascend, flying through the paned glass windows. The glass windows splinter, embedding the surrounding pavement and through the metal of the police cruisers. From out of the darkness of the shop, the woman reveals herself. She stands, her eyes a milky white color, her skin a bronze gold tone. Each step she takes leaves sparks behind her. "On your hands and knees," the sergeant yells. Blood drips off her body in thick streams. Instead of complying, she simply takes a bloody step forward. A slight chuckle escapes from her strange smile. One of the officers, who is shaking uncontrollably, pulls the trigger, releasing a single shot from the chamber with a loud pop. It flies right at the woman, but it stops mid-air, falling to the ground. At this, one of the officers screams, "It's a witch." They all begin opening fire in a frenzy, each one bouncing by some unknown force. Each one causes a spark of electricity to float and fizzle. Step by step she gets closer and closer to the officers behind their cars until she is in the middle of them. She turns her head in an almost doll-like movement, raises her arm and shoots a blast of lightning, destroying a police cruiser and turning the nearby officers into cooked corpses. One of the officers screams out as he charges her with a sword drawn, but before he reaches her, she quickly turns to him, slashing her arm, slicing him in half by some invisible force. At the edge of the street, the roar of trucks with their screeching tires alerts the strange woman. She grins slightly as they pull up, spinning around with their rears pointed at the lady. The truck's hangars open, revealing some large armored machines that stamp out with their gargantuan bodies. In their arms, long specialized guns with cables and cords snapped into the machine's arms. They take a few more steps forward as a new group of armored officers arrives. "Move out," yells an older man. He points to one of the officers hiding behind their police cruiser near the rear by the barricades. "Get these assholes out of here." Looking to the crowd of onlookers, sparks begin to float in the air in long streams and running across the hard pavement as the lady starts growling. Trash from around the city floats like leaves as the wind begins to pick up. One of the armored suits simply takes a few measured steps in front of the group. It points its barrel toward the woman kneeling into a sniper position on bended knee. Then with a loud scream, the woman sends forth a bolt of electricity at the machine, leaving a trail of fire behind it on the ground. It strikes the armor, causing a great spark to surface around it. Its blue and red LEDs dim for a moment, then brighten back up. The lady then freezes before the machine adjusts its target. A single flash from its muzzle blows off her right leg, severing it from the kneecap. It flies like a bowling pin away from her body, rolling and spinning several times on the ground. She tumbles onto her side at that moment before sprawling out on the ground. The older man chuckles, "Good shot." Several of the armored police rush in toward the girl with yellow plastic ties. However, just as one of the officers was about to place the cuffs on her, she pushes herself up with one arm, reaching and grabbing his neck. Her fingers press in before the man even has a chance to say a thing. A powerful blast blows the man's head to pieces with all ferocity of a shotgun blast. "Kill her," roars the older man. The officers draw their guns, shooting her several times, tearing her body to pieces. From above the buildings on a rooftop, a shadowed figure in a cloak stands to look at the bloody mess. "What a pity," she would promise. Images of a dull red flashing enter into Apricot's mind. She lays asleep deep under the thick cloud of slumber. A rather annoying buzzing keeps ringing in her ears. As the fog of sleep lifts, she opens her eyes from the darkness to see her room transitioning between a red glow and darkness. She turns her head over to see her alarm clock blinking. Her eyes grow wider as hearing returns and vision becomes comprehensible again. Two great LED lights shines 8:23 across a plastic screen. She lets out a yelp of shock. School begins at 9 o'clock and she was late, well late, as her alarm had been chiming since 7 o'clock. With a spark of animation, she thrusts out of bed onto her feet, sending her covers cascading onto the floor. As much as she hated to, she needed to get ready and fast. Her uniform hung nicely off a polished bronze curtain rod. She did not waste any time, as when she began moving through her room she was already putting on her uniform. She glances over at her makeup before deciding she hadn't the time for that today, even though this pained her to admit. Well, maybe just a little eyeliner, after all, that only takes a moment. Rushing into the kitchen, she finds her younger brother already at the table with half-eaten morning toast. His eyes fixated on the television. She glances at it, seeing an emergency broadcast on the screen. She imagined someone was jubilant to have the story and someone else was terribly unhappy to be the story. "What you watching?" she asks Jasper. "Oh, you're finally up," he says with a snicker. "Your alarm woke me up. It is pretty annoying how you don't shut that off. You have been sleeping through it." The police had another standoff with a witch. Apricot hated how smug her little brother was at times. The least the little bastard could have done is wake her up if he knew she was oversleeping. Apricot walks over to the fridge, opening it to reveal several leftovers, a few pre-made dishes still wrapped in plastic. She grabs a half carton of milk and begins drinking out of it. She grabs a few eggs and some butter from a small compartment. "You know, you could be a good boy for once and help your big sister Jazz." Jasper laughs. "You could be responsible for once and get yourself up." He keeps watching the screen before letting out a gasp. "Well, there is blood everywhere." Apricot lifts her head from the fridge, looking up at the image of bodies and limbs and pools of blood spread like modern art over the wide pavement. Jasper Signer. You know you are not supposed to watch stuff like this. Jasper growls, it's the news, and Mom is not home anyway, so stop lecturing me. But Dad is home. Jasper turns pale as he turns his head over to see his father standing over his shoulder. He places his hand on his son's back. What is this? Apricot feels a sense of satisfaction knowing that her dad caught him being a jerk. She springs back up, closing the fridge door with her foot. With a little burner, she begins making an omelette for breakfast. It's the news. Some monster attacked a bunch of people. They had to even call in the SDP. Jasper says with a hint of fascination in his voice. Volkner Model 4s, Dad. Ah, I see. Well, your sister's right, your mother would be furious if she found out you were looking at this. So turn it off, he says sternly before walking over to Apricot. And Missy, you are late for school. Think you have time for making breakfast when you are already late? Ah, is all Apricot says, feeling in the pit of her stomach that he is right. Walking along a crowded road, Apricot finds herself deep in worry about her tardiness. If she does not hurry, she will be late to catch the next train. She weaves a careful trot through the slow-moving morning crowd. While she reaches the end of the road, she soon discovers that it is blocked off. Running up to the barricade, she is quickly scolded by a tall man in uniform. Hey, girl, go around the other way, he shouts at her. She can see medical crews on the other side moving bodies, zipping them into bags. This must be where the attack had happened, Apricot thought to herself. Didn't you hear me? The man yells at her again. Go around. His hands now redirecting her in another direction. With a sigh, she turns around, heading back down the morning street as if walking through a current in the wrong direction. People did not move out of the way as most of the people were talking to each other about the situation. This became almost maddening to Apricot as she had somewhere to be and she sure as hell was not going to miss her train. It was in sight, but her heart sinks when she sees the train has already boarded passengers and room was quickly becoming scarce. She burst into a full sprint through the cluttered streets, bumping into people, saying sorry as she did. Just before the doors were closing, a young man holds it open with on the arm and reaches out the other. It begins moving as Apricot picks up pace, running fast, her arm outstretched, reaching for the man's hand. He lunges forward, gripping at her phalanges tightly, lifting her off the ground into the threshold of the train, the doors slamming shut behind her. Hey there, almost missed your train, he chuckles. Apricot blushes slightly before saying, yeah, thanks to you I didn't. He smirks before looking her up and down, stopping at her bust before moving back up to her eyes. Oh great, he is a pervert, she thought to herself. Got caught up at the detour, huh? He says. Apricot nods softly. So, did you? Nah, but quite a few people were complaining about it. I just kind of figured, he said as he leaned back, grabbing hold of the headrail. It's pretty crowded in here this morning. Normally this route is pretty empty. I heard they had to shut down the whole subway system in Jinzhou for repairs. Apricot nods, not really knowing what to say to that. She could tell he was waiting for her to say something, but instead his eyes roll a little. So, what brings you out this lovely morning? I am going to uni actually. I'm studying journalism. Apricot says, a hint of pride welling up inside her. The guy smirks a little. Journalism, huh? He looks at her. You got a camera? The question struck Apricot as odd. It was out of place, but not enough to be absurd, but still out of place all the same. Oh, I just figured a journalist would be into photography. I got this camera I am trying to sell. Thought you may want to buy it. No, not really. I am not really looking to get into photography. I lied, but she figured the camera was probably stolen or broken. The young man nods his head. Oh yeah, Well, if you ever change your mind, I ride the train almost every morning, so come see me. The name is Cortez, just letting you know. At first Apricot thought he was coming on to her, but after a moment Cortez raised his hand waving to her, proceeding to say see you around, okay. Then blended into the crowd of people, losing himself among the timber bodies. A thin layer of beaded sweat streaked across Apricot's rose-iron cheeks. Her clothes slightly soggy from the long jog into her to and through the university's entrance corridor. A feeling of intense anxiety coming over her as she gazed upon a letter screen displaying the current time, 10:04 a.m. in great neon blue numbers. She rushed through the sparsely populated halls that twisted into something like a maze. The detour, of course, they will keep the door open. Apricot thought to herself to at least edge some of the tension. Upon seeing the classroom door of 1403B, she could see through the glass door window the off-white paper shade had already been drawn down. Reaching for the knob of the door, she twists only to meet a substantial resistance of locked metal fastens. With a grunt, she tried again, but once again in vain. The knob only jiggled with little give. She took a few steps away from the door before lowering her head. A feeling of tightness flowing down her head to her fingertips, eventually ending its stream at her toes. She drew in a long breath, holding it for a moment before letting out a long sigh. Late again. She thought to herself. Blue Ash on a weekday is not much unlike any other bustling city, a shadow of the population. Apricot passed people dressed in the various fashions along a narrow street. The smells of skewered BBQ over a charcoal grill filled the air. Along the edges of the roads were different shops selling trinkets. One that caught Apricot's eye was a shop window selling the latest style spread across mechanical dolls, striking an assortment of poses. They look almost real, Apricot thought to herself, almost. It was in that small gap between the two that she found so unsettling and utterly wrong. Something about the eyes, they were dead. The bustle of programmed synths diverts her attention to an arcade. I don't have much else to do, she thinks to herself, being drawn in by the flashing neon lights. Inside smelled of a pipe scent that barely covered the humid heat generated by a mix of body sweat and cigarette smoke. Spread across the walls various machines flashing, each one playing an assortment of tunes that blended together to form that iconic arcade sound. It quiets a cacophony, but rather a pleasant ring that Apricot had come to associate with a fun time. One game, in particular, had been the flavor she was looking for to cheer herself up. A side-scrolling hack and slash by Capcom called Queen of Dragons. A chill ran down her spine as the machines dimmed, a slight flicker coming over the screens. Crap, the power is going to go out, she thought to herself. When a spectre of breath faded into the open air from her mouth, she felt cold. A very out-of-place cold, as if she had walked into a freezer. Then as quickly as it came, it went, but not before causing all the machines to reset. Each one had started their boot sequences, which caused her to let out a slight moan of boredom. The appeal of battling against pixelated monsters had left, and with it herself as well. She continued to wander the streets until finding herself on a side street she was utterly unfamiliar with. The shops around here were different. Dusty old places that looked as though they were from some long-forgotten time. She passed a hardware store, an electronics shop, a very shady-looking pawn shop, second-hand stores, and a small market called Wiseman's. The people wandering these streets were of another nature. If the ones previously reminded Apricot of people without a care, these ones made her feel in danger. She walked by several men giving her unwelcome glances, along with a grin that said everything she needed to know about them. She decided it would be best to get back onto a more populated street. However, when she went to turn the corner, she was welcomed by the sight of four guys kicking another man in the ribs. He barked out as each strike slammed against him, knocking his body from side to side. She stood with a look of horror on her face before shouting out, "Stop!" As the guys turned to look at her, She realized the folly of her reflexive action. Now she had the audience of 4 rather hard-looking men. Silence is broken by one last kick from a tall man in the guy's face. "Yeah, let's get out of here. Remember to have the rest of it, punk. If not, get the hell out of town or else." All 4 men began walking toward Apricot, her heart sinking into her throat. Without so much as a glance, the 4 just walk past her. She looks down at the man who spits some blood out of his mouth. As she looks at the man on the ground, she is struck to recognize him. It was the man from before on the subway. Apricot narrows her eyes before saying, "Are you all right? Do I need to call the cops?" "No," he says, getting to his feet. "Don't do something stupid like that. Stay out of it. It's none of your business." He then gets to his feet, limping away. Apricot wanted to go with him to at least make sure he was okay, but she knew it was best if she didn't. Getting involved with people like that can get you hurt or even worse. Unlike most, Apricot had a keen appreciation for the unseen. Her desire to become a journalist had brought out a sort of pseudo-respect of some things are best left unknown. After several streets, Apricot sees a familiar sign, Utopian Theatres, and immediately knows exactly where she is. Just a bit further down the road is a small cafe called Hot Shots. Upon entering, Apricot is greeted by the strong scent of freshly brewed espresso. Inside, the decor, a pleasant chocolate wood color accented with soft greens and red pastel windows. Light music conveys the senses, allowing for privacy but not enough to drain out your thoughts. As she walks to the counter, the smell of fresh baked goods wafted, causing an almost Pavlovian salivation to occur. "Hey girl, I thought you had school." Apricot looks up to see the bright blue eyes of Bonnie Willox, one of her best friends from high school. "Bonnie." Apricot chirps with delight, reaching over the counter to give a warm hug. "I did not know you worked here." "Yeah, well, I needed a part-time job. Turns out you just can't be a movie star without having one." She laughs. "So what brings you here?" "I was late for class. Stupid detour blocked my train," Apricot says. Bonnie leans over, whispering, "I got a story for you. I overheard some cops talking about that. They spoke of the boss being upset about not getting the witch alive." Apricot gives a funny look. "How is that a story?" The way they were talking about it was not like the typical upset they had to kill it, but like they wanted it for something. Bonnie said, leaning back. "I will tell you more about it later, but right now, is there anything I can get you?" Apricot nods her head before placing a finger on her cheek. "Just a coffee with French vanilla and a spot of half and half."